Hi, Dreckie here, and today let's compare the SJCam M20 and the Gitup Git2 Pro. I gave both these cameras a favorable rating, and on paper their specs are quite similar, but there is a big difference in body style and how they process video. So without further ado, let's take a look at the cameras. Body style is largely a personal preference, and I prefer the body of the M20 over the Git2, and the main reason is the extra button on the side. When I am scrolling through menus on the Git2, I always find myself scrolling past the setting I want, and then I have to go through the entire process again, which is a little bit frustrating. Whereas with the M20, if I scroll past a setting, I can use the up button to return to the last option. I like how the M20 screen is flush with the back of the camera. Since the Git2's is indented, it picks up dust and dirt and just doesn't look as professional. If I get fingerprints on the M20, they just wipe right off. Whereas with the Git2, I have to have this screen protector on it so that it doesn't get covered in fingerprints that will be unremovable. The Git2 screen is easier to read in daylight though, as the M20's becomes a little bit washed out and difficult to see. Each camera has one-click access to important camera settings on the recording screen, and the way they operate is largely similar, but it's important to note that the Git2 has far more settings for camera tweaks and can be more complicated to figure out. If you're the kind of person who likes to adjust the video settings, the Git2 is the camera for you, but if you're looking for something that's straightforward and ready to go without anything major to screw up, probably sway towards the M20. In terms of video quality for broad daylight, the M20 does significantly better than the Git2 for color balance. There's always been something a little bit odd about my copy of the Git2. It white balances on the yellow side and emphasizes the saturation of greens more than it should, and that occasionally produces ugly results. I prefer the color balance of the M20. It's a little bit more red, but that gives it a more neutral feel. Both cameras are equal in terms of sharpness. The M20 does seem to have just a little bit less distortion though, and that's probably because the M20 has a narrower field of view. Once the cameras get into mixed lighting conditions, I found that the M20 began to struggle, especially in 1080p 60. When I rode from the bright street into the darker forest, it started to smudge frames and jitter. The Git2 does the same thing, and this is a big area where both cameras fail. The M20 is a little bit more apparent though, because it starts to smudge frames together even in some brighter daylight situations. This effect happens because each frame needs to be 1/60th of a second, and the camera tries to drop the shutter speed below 1/60th to something like 1/30th or 1/20th. So in 30 frames per second mode, this issue wasn't as apparent, but it was still there a little bit. This issue is the only thing that holds me back from wholeheartedly recommending both cameras. Even other cheaper cameras can get this right, like the C30 or the SJCam SJ5000X Elite. I don't mind the frames losing detail and blurring together, but the fact that the video actually skips and jumps is unacceptable, as there's no way to correct that in post. In my opinion, these cameras should not be able to drop below 1/60th of a second when in 60 frames per second mode, or at least they should prioritize shutter speed over ISO. What this all means in layman's terms is that in low light both cameras are only usable in 1080p 30, 2K 30, and in that situation they look okay but not great. As expected, both cameras hold up to night shooting until about the same time due to the same internal hardware. As it gets dark, the frames begin to blur and smudge together until nothing is really visible anymore. Don't expect to be filming anything important under streetlights anytime soon. This also limits these cameras' use as a dash cam, as they don't have bright enough video to be useful at night. In terms of audio quality, the Git2 kicks butt compared to the M20. Let's listen to a sample.
This is an audio sample of the Gitup Git2 Pro inside of the waterproof case. I'm standing about a foot away from the camera right now and just talking in a normal speaking voice. This is an audio sample of the SJCam M20 inside of the waterproof case. I'm standing about a foot away from the camera right now and speaking in a normal voice.
Yeah, that wasn't silence, that was the M20 in its waterproof case. Outside of the case, the M20 doesn't have the greatest audio either, so expect to use external recording hardware if you need critical audio. The Git2 does have the option of an external microphone, but the M20 does not. In bright lighting, both cameras have a Gyro Stabilizer, which smooths out the footage and does a remarkable job of keeping it steady. I primarily film my sample footage with the camera attached to the handlebars of my bike, which is pretty much the worst case scenario for vibrations, and both cameras do a good job of nullifying any bumps that I hit. One thing I noticed about the M20 is that in mixed and low lighting, the gyro does not function as well, so the Gitup's gyro is a little bit better because it holds up in these situations. Still photos are more or less the same since there's the same sensor and the same processor. Again, the M20 has a little bit better color, but the difference is really minimal in most situations. Overall, in my opinion, for filming in broad daylight, like skateboarders, skiers, and surfers, the M20 does a fantastic job with better color balance than the Git2. It's a little bit easier to use with less options to screw up. It's not so good in mixed lighting situations though, and the audio is pretty bad because it's impossible to hear. The Git2, on the other hand, has the option for an external microphone plugged into the USB port, and is also one button click to record. The audio is much louder, and the gyro works a little bit better. It still isn't the greatest in mixed lighting situations, but Gitup says they're fixing this problem in the next firmware update. Finally. SJCam, on the other hand, did acknowledge the problem, but didn't say when they were fixing it. For those of you who want a straightforward camera with overall good video quality in daylight, get the M20, but be aware that it works best in 30 frames per second mode. If you're interested in something a little more complicated with more settings and options available to you, look to the Git2. My favorite camera would be a mix of the two personally, the SJCam with the Gitup tweaks, but I doubt something like that's going to happen. Hopefully this has helped you pick which camera to buy. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below and I'll try my best to answer. Thank you for watching.